So thank you all for being here to honor Forrest. It's a wonderful day in my life when I can take the time to do that as well. So I thought I would just tell you some stories about how Forrest continues to show up in my life, how he lives on, and what he wants to be remembered for. So, you remember one of his 25 books was Entertaining Angels. And so he's still doing his thing. He's entertaining himself. And he comes and visits in strange ways and in strange places. So I thought I'd just tell you about a few of them. A year and a half ago, I was deep in the Amazon, in the Ecuadorian jungle, supporting a tribe that had 30 years ago not been discovered. And we were there to support the women in that tribe in terms of maternal health, and support the men who were really beginning the journey of recognizing that strong women were an important part of healthy communities. So it was a very exciting time, and I was there with my husband Rob, which is, some of you might not know this story. Rob and I got married 2 years ago, but we worked together for 10 years. And one day, in working together, he said to me something about God. And I said, "What do you know about God?" "I'm married to a minister." And he said, "Well, I've got my divinity degree from Harvard." And I said, "Well, so does my husband. So does my husband." And he said, "Well, who's your husband?" And I told him, well, he and Forrest were at divinity school together. They interned together at First and Second Church with Reese Williams. And they knew each other 15 years before I knew either of them. And this was about 6 months before Forrest got sick, 2006. And so I reconnected them. And the three of us spent time together in those 3 ensuing years. So that was a match made in heaven. So there I was, down in the Amazon, millions of miles, it seemed, away from anything, in a very remote area. And there was a fire, and we had just done a ceremony. And I didn't see him. I was sitting with Rob. But people across the fire saw Forrest. Now, they didn't know Forrest. They told me about this afterwards. But they saw him walk into the fire area, walk up to Rob and me, put his arms out, you know how he would, standing in front of us. And then he walked behind us and put his arms out and blessed us. I didn't hear the story till about a week later. But that night, Forrest came to me and was in tremendous pain. And it's the first time I'd ever felt him in pain. But you might not know, but after he passed away, he was cremated, and I had him in 2 different urns. One that was buried at our house in Shelter Island, and one that was buried next to his father. I had created a headstone for him in Idaho, because he was the 4th, and I had him buried next to Forrest Church, the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd. And there's a wonderful headstone in Boise. The Reverend Dr. Frank Forrest Church, the 4th. But I only had half of him there. I don't know which half, but it was a good half.
It was the right half.
It was the right half. But even though I didn't know that he had shown up and blessed Rob and me, when he came to me that night, when I really felt his pain at being separated and not being with his ancestors. And what I heard was he was ready, that I was ready and he was ready. And I got home from Ecuador and called his mom, Vivian, and told her I was bringing him home, which I did. And he's now, all of him is right there, Frank Forrest Church, the 4th, next to the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd. The second time he showed up to me was it was 6 months ago, I was in Machu Picchu in Peru. And I'm sitting with a group of people who I didn't know. And I'm talking to the guy next to me, and he had lost his brother. And so I was saying, I'm sorry, and we were sharing, and so I shared the fact that I understand what that means. I'd lost my husband. And I mentioned Forrest's name. He said, Forrest Church? It's Machu Picchu. And I said, yes. He said, you're not going to believe this. And he called his wife over. His wife was Forrest's date to the Carter inaugural ball. They were seniors in high school. So all of a sudden I had Forrest there. I heard all about what he was like as a senior in high school. I would not have liked him then. And he shows up in my grandson, Jamie Forrest Church Adams, who's 4. So he shows up in different ways. He also lives on in so many ways. You know, many of you have been to the Forrest Church lecture that we did at Union. 4 really wonderful lectures. I know many of you contributed to the Forrest Church Memorial Fund, and I owe you all a letter which is currently in draft form, because the trustees and I decided that it was time to really invest all of the funds into things that could be really meaningful and sustaining. And so Forrest is going to live on in 3 more ways. Yes, at Union, to create a course to teach people how to preach, because Forrest made the word live. And we've all been really struck by that, and we need to teach people how to do that. So there's going to be a course on preaching. That will be the Forrest Church course, and we'll teach his style, his sermons, and Forrest wanted that to be taught in seminary. There's also, starting in 2016, we've made a big grant to Meadville Lombard. They're going to create the Forrest Church Convocation, which will happen every year at the beginning of their year, in order to have all of the students at Meadville Lombard and other scholars come together. And that will be something that will be, where there'll be written documentation about the Forrest Church Convocation. And lastly, the rest is going to Auburn Theological Seminary, where I'm on the board. You know, the mission of Auburn is to equip bold and resilient leaders of faith and moral courage to trouble the water and heal the world. Is that not Forrest? And what's really remarkable is they're creating the Center for Multi-Faith Collaboration to advance the multi-faith movement for justice. And Rabbi Rubenstein, Peter Rubenstein, after 30 years, who is matriculating from the senior rabbi of Central Synagogue, was so inspired by the idea of the Forrest Church Fund. And it turned out that Rabbi Rubenstein, who was a colleague of Forrest, had been, a long time ago, the chair of the board of Auburn. And so he has asked the entire congregation that the retirement gift for him should be in support of the Multi-Faith Center for Collaboration, which will have a plaque for Forrest and a plaque for Rabbi Rubenstein. And last but not least, the Forrest Church Humanitarian Award. And a lot of you here, some of you here are on that committee, and you know, the award has been fantastic. You know, it has honored some wonderful people: Bill Clinton, Mayor Bloomberg, Ken Burns last year, Mary Robinson, Gail McGovern from the American Red Cross, Dr. Paul Farmer. And this year, the Heart and Soul Committee has done an incredible job of securing the award for Nick Kristoff and his wife. But instead of a lecture, we're separating the Forrest Church Award from the auction so that we can give these incredible people more time to be in conversation. And again, really my hat off to the the Heart and Soul board that has really worked tirelessly to make this happen. So Forrest lives on in so many ways. His mom passed away a year ago, December, and you know, I remember calling Bethune when Forrest got sick, and in her typical fashion, she said, "What? doesn't God know that Forrest is an important piece of the furniture? She said, the rest of us are end tables. Forrest is an important piece of the furniture. And she's right about that, where things still surround around him. And you know, I mentioned to you that I called Bethine and told her I was bringing Forrest home. But we decided that I would bring him home in 6 months after my call, because in the ensuing months, Nina was having her second baby, Emily Jane Church Adams. And Nina wanted to make sure she could be in Idaho when we brought Forrest home. So Bethine and I agreed that we would bring him home on February 1st. 2014. I went to see Bethine a week before she passed away in December 2013, and we had a wonderful couple days together, and we talked about her seeing Forrest and Frank. I asked her to hang on if she could to that February 1st when we had planned it, because this was only 3 days after Nina had given birth. But I said, no worries. You know, either this side or the next side, we'll see you. So we ended up burying Bethine and Forrest on the same day, on February 1st. But at Forrest's graveside, all the kids were there. And I read from one of Forrest's books. One of my favorite books about death, when he talked about it. What he said is, dying is you're dying in the middle of the story. And the only thing that's really bad is you don't get a chance to see how the story ends for the people that you love. But that if you've lived well and loved well, don't get me started, Susan. If you have lived well and loved well, you will have forever guided the plot and shaped the characters of the people that you love. So at the gravesite, I asked each of the kids to share something that had happened that he would want to know about, because he left in the middle of the story. And it was a wonderful closure in time for all of us. You know, Forrest wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be remembered. And he wanted to be remembered in 3 different ways. He wanted to be remembered as a great historian. And you know, one of the crowning achievements for him was, as he was diagnosed, he was finishing his book, So Help Me God. And that is now still considered one of the best books on religious history of the early America. But then he went on to write Love and Death, because he wanted to be remembered as a wonderful pastor. But before he died, most importantly, he wrote Cathedral of the World, because he wanted to be remembered and taught as a great theologian. And this plaque can honor him for all those things. For all the people who didn't have the chance to get to know him the way we haven't had a chance to get to know him. And I know he lives on in all of us, but he can live on in so many more people. And you know, thank goodness he has that 25 books, and you know, Dan has done such a great job of honoring Forrest, so that we can remember him in so many ways. And I think the last thing I want to say is one of my favorite stories, and forgive me because I can't remember the congregant's name, but oh yes, it was Warren.
Warren Bryan?
No. Anyway, it'll come to me. But when their children were little,
Warren Lisa.
Nope. It's all right. I don't want to get you off track. When their children were little, and they brought them to All Souls for the first time, and they put them in church school, and then afterwards they brought them down to Fellowship Hall. They went to they went to the service. They put the kids in church school. They then went to Fellowship Hall. The kids had coffee cake and all that kind of stuff. And at the end, the mom said to the little girl, "So you have a good day? What was your favorite thing? And she said, oh, I know it. My favorite thing was the wizard. Forrest in his robe. Reading people at the beginning with the beard. And she said that was her favorite thing the entire day, was the wizard.
Warren and
Julia, right?
Yes, thank
Yes.
I
you.
can't
Warren
remember
and
their
Julia.
last name, but I remember
Yes,
the family.
Warren and
yeah.
Julia. That's exactly right. Lived in Texas now.
Yeah, right.
Gregory.
So,
Warren Gregory. Yes.
Warren Gregory.
Julia
There we go.
Gregory.
There we go. Names for 20. So, I'm very excited about this. I know you all are. And we now get a chance to hear more details. So thank you all for coming.